I, Claudius Gall, Centurion of Judea, have come to expect the troops. Anyone here who's ever served in the military? Raise your hands. Is that the way you're supposed to be in front of an officer? Attention, soldiers! Let's see what we got here. This is awful strange right here. A woman in the military?
Sir, yes, sir.
We never had that in my day. Soldier, stick in your gut. Okay, here. Well, it's good to know we've got a few good men in the room. You may be at ease. And I may need to call on you in a little bit. I have come today to share with you my experiences as being a centurion. Maybe some of you are unfamiliar with that rank. It's not just a common officer. It's one that could have come from very ordinary circumstances in life, but it's one who probably had to work his way up, sometimes from the very bottom. But men, you remember that, men who were noble and courageous and strong and had great character could work their way up to the rank of centurion. Now, centurion was a commander, like a captain in the military today. Man who was responsible for 100 men. Sometimes, depending on how many soldiers, it might be as few as 60, but all the way up to 100. We were basically the ones who decided where troops would go and how the strategy for the fighting would be. It was difficult. It's not easy being a centurion. You had responsibilities not only of maintaining order within the troops, but you had plans to make. You had to figure out how to move them around. You had to be an example for these men. It included training and discipline. And sometimes discipline was at the end of a stick. This is the vetus. A centurion was known for his vetus because often he would discipline his men across their backs when they disobeyed orders. Sometimes the penalty for disobeying an order was death. But we were looking for good, courageous, strong men who wanted to serve in that role. Perhaps one of you would be a centurion. Back in those days, I can remember being placed in Judea. We were part of a cohort. A cohort was 10 centuries or 1,000 men. We were placed in the upper range of Judea. And I remember one day just being so impressed with the people there in Judea. They just had open hearts and kind minds and really were very generous to us. As being a centurion, I had access to people's lives that other soldiers would not. I was able to deal with them financially, was often able to help people within the province. Now, the Judeans were difficult in one sense, and that is that they wanted to worship a different God than the rest of the Roman Empire. We had emperor worship, as well as some mystery cults and some other religions that had gone back ages. But the Jews worshiped this one God that they would not even speak his name. They would have various leaders within, from various sects within that religious tradition. they had teachers that would travel from time to time, different places. And I remember when we were stationed at Capernaum, I heard about a man, a teacher, who had the gift and the power of healing. And that was not too unusual in our day. This man, name was Jesus. He was from Nazareth. And I heard he had this power and this gift, and one of my servants fell sick. And so I sent word to him that if he would command this servant of mine to be healed, that servant would be healed. I explained to my messenger that I was the commander. When I said go somewhere, my soldiers would go somewhere. When I told them to do something, they would do something. I understood authority. And I understood that this man had authority. He preached with authority. He taught with authority. He healed with authority. And my messenger went and came back. And as he came back, my servant was healed of the sickness. I didn't think about that man for a long time after that. I guess it was 2 years later. Every year in Jerusalem, there is a season in the Jewish calendar called Passover. And Judeans from all over the area would go there for Passover. And there were some Judeans that were not so loving and peaceful. You know, those in Capernaum, I was very close with. In fact, I gave money to them to help build their synagogue. So I loved the people there. But sometimes there were zealots among those people who wanted to take issue with the power of Rome and the right of Rome to rule their land. Now, you must understand, Rome had been ruling that area for almost 100 years by then. And that area of the world was experiencing peace. Some of your later scholars would call that Pax Romana, or the peace of Rome. The stability that the Roman Empire made to the land was so important. But these zealots, they were longing for a Messiah, a liberator of the people. And that was something that we had to deal with. And so an extra cohort was sent from the north to Jerusalem for this event. We got there on Saturday. The Jews called it the Sabbat. We made our way there and rested and prepared to do some work and preparations for this feast, this high day that they were having called the Passover. And as we were resting, we noticed a commotion, a discussion among some of the leaders, the elders of that day, of someone, a Messiah, coming to Jerusalem. That day, a man came riding on a donkey. Most unusual sight, because he had a crowd of people following him. Very unusual. And they were waving palm branches and chanting praises. Hosea, Hosea in the highest. They kept chanting these things as they came forward to the gates of Jerusalem. And many of them were taking off their clothes and lying them down on the ground as this man on the back of the donkey came through the gates. I'll never forget that day, because I recognized the man. It was this Jesus of Nazareth that I had known 2 years before, but never had the opportunity to meet. All of a sudden, out of the crowd, he looked at me. Perhaps maybe it was the different headdress that I had as a centurion. You know, we wore these headdresses so that the troops could see us in battle, so that they would know we were standing strong. One thing a centurion would never do is back down. We never retreated unless we were ordered to retreat. And as I stood there, hoping to keep peace, in Jerusalem during the Passover that this man looked me directly in the eye and held his gaze on me. And it was a look that I never experienced before. It was a look that went to my soul. Well, I knew this was a good man. And I hoped to do everything that I could to make sure that he was going to be okay. So I followed him. And immediately he went to the temple. I stood outside and so I heard a commotion inside. People were angry and upset. And some of the high priest came to me and said, there's a man in here that's causing trouble. Come and arrest him. And so I went in to see what was all about, and sure enough, there was a man that had thrown tables over. You know, that particular place in the temple was the court of the Gentiles, they called it. It was a dirty and disgusting place. Animals and their waste and blood. It was just a disgusting place, and it was the only place that the Judeans would allow us to go into in their temple. And I noticed Jesus, as he was passing out of the temple into the crowd, he looked over at me and said, I did this for you. And I had to smile because that place needed cleaning up. Well, we didn't arrest him. We let him go. But I was concerned. I needed to make sure that we watched this man, not because he was going to cause any trouble, but for his own safety. Because these Jews were interesting people. They were often concerned about someone, and they would let that concern lead them to some act of violence. So I was very wary of what might happen. So I didn't stay too far away from their group. The next day, I had opportunity to hear this Jesus of Nazareth talking with some of his disciples. And we heard him teaching them, and some of the scribes and the Pharisees came to him and posed a question to him. And they brought up Caesar's name. And so my ears perked up. Depending on what he said would be very important on what might happen to him. They asked him about paying the temple tax. And he asked for a coin. And someone brought him one of the Roman coins with Caesar's image on it. And he held it up and said, whose image is on this coin? And they said, Caesar's. And he said this brilliant thing that put those who were upset with him to shame. He said, give unto Caesar that which is of Caesar's, and give unto God that which is of God. I thought, this man, he knows his stuff. I was impressed. But still, I tried not to stay too far away, because I was worried what now they might do, since he was able to rebuke them. I was really surprised that on the next day, I saw one of his own followers leave the group to go visit some of the Jewish leaders. And I didn't try to get too close, but I was close enough to overhear some of the conversations. And apparently, this disciple was working out an arrangement to give Jesus over unto them. And apparently, there was some money involved. Now, I knew about money. I knew the importance of money. As a centurion, I was paid 5 times that of an ordinary legionary. Not only that, but at retirement, after 20 to 25 years, a centurion would receive a large land grant. And having also been responsible for making sure the other legionaries' money was kept safe, sometimes I would charge them for doing that work. So a legionary would be a very wealthy person. So I understood the importance of money. But I could have never sold my allegiance away, especially to an innocent man like that. A man who had done so much good. It saddened me to see that happen. Well, the next day, I noticed the disciples were gathering together in someone's home. And I noticed they went up on the roof for a meal together. And that was common in our day. The tops of the homes were left open. So in the evening, during the hottest time of the day, the families could stay up on the roof and have their meal together, like a patio in your day. And as I watched from a distance, I noticed they were gathering together and sharing the customary Passover meal together. As soon as the meal was done and they sung a hymn, I noticed they exited out and went to the garden, not too far down the road. And I saw this man praying by himself. His disciples kept falling asleep. He kept going back and trying to wake them up, and they kept falling asleep. Finally, off in the distance, I heard a commotion. It was another cohort, another centurion, and another group of soldiers that were coming to arrest this man. Apparently, they had found or trumped up some charges against him, and so, indeed, he was arrested. But you wouldn't believe what happened. As one of those men came forward, one of his disciples took his dagger and cut the man's ear off. And then the Lord Jesus knelt down, picked up that man's ear, and placed it right back on his head. I know that sounds crazy. I couldn't believe it myself. But this man truly was a miracle worker. They asked him who he was, that they were looking for Jesus. He says, I am he. And so they arrested him. And they took him before the Sanhedrin, before Caiaphas. And they brought charges against him. Apparently, someone had said that he had claimed to be the Son of God. And in Jewish law, that was blasphemy. To them, that was worthy of the death penalty. But the Jews had no power of killing anyone in the Roman Empire. That was left up to the Romans. And if anyone executed someone, it would be the responsibility of a centurion. That was my responsibility. I had been given the task of executing anyone that needed to be executed during that time period. They left the other centurions that were already stationed in Judea to deal with issues in the community and let the outsiders that didn't live there do the executions. Well, I felt surely this innocent man who continued to do good would not be executed because of anything he might have said about being God. That was pretty common in my day. There were a lot of people. Caesar even said he was God. Well, I was wrong. they recommended that the man be taken to Pilate. Now, Pilate was a Roman leader in that area. Pilate had the ability to free this man. And they took him to him, and he could find no charges against Jesus. So he sent him to Herod, son of Herod the Great. Perhaps he would know what to do with Jesus. But he didn't want to do anything with Jesus either. He didn't want to accept the responsibilities, so he was sent back to Pilate. I understand that Pilate thought he had a brilliant idea. You see, during the Passover, there was a custom of allowing one of those zealots to be freed, to help keep the peace, Pax Romana, you call it. So he assumed that surely the Jewish people would want Jesus freed. But no. They'd rather have some zealot, Barabbas, released, not this Jesus of Nazareth. So I took a group of my men and we went to Calvary to prepare the cross. Apparently there were two that would be crucified, and now a third. In the distance I heard the floggings and the beatings and the whippings. The other men used a whip to flog his flesh, tore it open. The next time I saw this man, he looked nothing like what I had seen before. Blood over his entire body. I thought they had already killed him when I first saw him carrying that cross to Golgotha. It was a horrendous sight. And the women following him, weeping. And an innocent man. I'll never forget when I gave the order for them to put him on the cross and to nail his hands and his feet on the cross. What he said as he looked over at me right in my face again: Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. But I knew he was an innocent man. But there was nothing that I could do. I was a centurion. I'd been given an order. I had to go to the end with it. Couldn't turn back. Never seen anything like it before. They placed him up on the cross. He was thirsty, and they tried to give him something to drink, but he wouldn't take it. He talked to his mother and to one of his friends. Then he shouted out some strange words I had never heard before. And I asked one of the Judeans, what did he say? He said he was quoting from the scriptures. My God, why have thou forsaken me? Then he said, it is finished. What was finished? I didn't understand. And then he finally said, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. And then he took a deep breath and died. Suddenly there was an earthquake, and the sky turned completely dark. And I heard around the city moanings and groanings, and I fell down on my knees, frightened and afraid. Me, a centurion, who should never be afraid. And I looked up at this man and realized, truly, surely, this man was the Son of God. My life was changed forever that moment. I found out later, in talking with some of his disciples, that I was the only one brave enough to utter those words that day. That even his closest companions and friends and family feared to say those truthful words. In fact, in one of the gospel that you have, Mark's gospel, I was the only person to confess Jesus as God. That means there's hope for you. You would-be soldiers of God have a decision to make. You see, our Lord is looking for a few good men and women to join his army. Wherever it is you live or stay, but he's looking for you to take up his high calling, to follow him to the cross, a few days after his death, we heard the rumors. Apparently there was some concern that his body would be stolen, so soldiers were placed outside the tomb for a few days. Usually after 3, 4, 5 days, there's no worry because the body is too unpleasant for anyone to mess with. But in the middle of the night, on the third day, some of my own men fell asleep at their post. Those of you in the military know the consequences of that. Let's just say I had to use my Vetus that day. His disciples said that he was alive again. Now, I never saw him again. But I know this: if anyone could come back, it was that man. I saw it in his eyes when he looked at me. Surely, he was the Son of God. But that's a decision you've got to make for yourself. I was the first to make it, even though I was a Gentile and a Roman. Perhaps on this anniversary of that day when the tomb was empty, you'll sign up for his army. Until we meet again, soldiers, Stay strong in the faith. Stay committed to the high calling of our Lord. Be sure to tie your shoes as well. Go in God's grace and peace after you sing. Attention, troops.